Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The dust tasted of ghosts. Kale knew the flavor intimately, a compound of pulverized ferrocrete, ancient plastics, and the faint, metallic tang of blood that had soaked into the soil for generations. He knelt, his armored glove brushing a layer of the fine gray powder from a cracked data slate. The script was unreadable, eroded by the acidic winds that scoured the ruins of what was once a city. It was just another dead thing in a world of dead things. His world, Sector 7, formerly known as the European subcontinent, now just a designation on a reclaimer's docket. His visor display flickered, overlaying the desolation with the cold, green lines of his survey grid. An alert pulsed in the corner of his vision. Biosignature anomaly detected. Class Gamma. Protocol 4 Charlie. Incineration. That was the protocol for everything that twitched without a council-issued transponder. He rose, the servos in his reclamation suit whining in protest against the grit that worked its way into every joint. For 10 years he had walked these ruins, a janitor for a graveyard, sweeping up the unauthorized remnants of life. He was a soldier once, fighting for the council's expansion. Now he was just a warden, ensuring the planet stayed quiet and sterile. The anomaly was close. His boots crunched over shattered pavement and the skeletal remains of ground vehicles. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long and bitter experience. The signal led him to the husk of a building, a library by the look of its grand, collapsed archway. Inside, the wind moaned through shattered windows, creating a choir of sorrow. The dust was thicker here, muffling his steps. He followed the pulsing green waypoint on his heads-up display to the building's core, where the roof had given way decades ago, allowing a sliver of the sickly, filtered sunlight to penetrate the gloom. There, in a small crater of exposed earth amidst the tiled floor, was the source of the signal. It was not some scuttling mutant or patch of rogue fungus. It was a pod, no larger than his fist, of a material that looked like polished, petrified wood. It was obsidian dark, yet seemed to drink the meager light, and faint, silvery veins pulsed with a slow, rhythmic luminescence. It was a sylvan seed. He had seen them before, in grainy briefing vids. Remnants of the enemy, the indigenous biosphere the Council had spent 50 years eradicating to claim this world. They were classified as the highest order of bioweapon, capable of terraforming entire sectors into uninhabitable alien jungles. Protocol 4 Charlie was clear. He unslung the incinerator from his back, its pilot light hissing to life with a hungry blue flame. He leveled the nozzle, his finger resting on the trigger. The seed pulsed again, a little faster this time, as if it could feel the heat. He hesitated. It was just a thing. A plant. A leftover from a war that was over before he was born. He had followed Protocol 4 Charlie 1,000 times. He had burned strange blossoms that sang in the wind, and crawling vines that bled liquids like mercury. He had sterilized acres of land for infractions far smaller than this. But this one was different. It did not look menacing. It looked dormant, waiting. He thought of the endless gray, the silent ruins, the taste of ghosts on his tongue. He had spent a decade enforcing this silence, this sterility. And for what? So the Council could strip mine the planetary core without biological interference. His life was a series of orders followed, of boxes ticked on a report. Eradicate. Sterilize. Reclaim. A single pulse of light from the seed, brighter than the others, seemed to travel up the beam of his incinerator and into his eyes. It felt like a question. He lowered the weapon. His HUD flashed a red warning. Protocol deviation imminent. He ignored it. Reaching into a pouch on his belt, he pulled out his water canteen. The water was recycled, tasting faintly of ozone and the filtration system that kept him alive. It was more precious than ammunition out here. He knelt again, the servos groaning. He unscrewed the cap, his movements feeling strangely significant, heavy with a choice he did not understand. He tilted the canteen, and a stream of clear, life-giving water splashed over the obsidian pod. The dust around it turned to dark mud. The seed drank it in. For a moment, nothing happened. He thought perhaps he had been a fool, wasting his ration on a dead rock. Then the light within it flared, not a pulse, but a sustained, brilliant silver glow. The ground trembled beneath his knees. The silver veins on the pod's surface cracked open, not with a sound, but with a silent exhalation of emerald energy. A green shoot, impossibly vibrant, erupted from the top. It grew with unnatural speed, unfurling into a complex lattice of leaves that shimmered like spun glass. Then the pod itself dissolved, its woody shell breaking down into a cascade of light that flowed into the earth. From that light, a form rose. It was humanoid, sculpted from living wood and woven leaves, its flesh the color of pale bark and its hair a cascade of phosphorescent moss. It was tall, slender, and its limbs seemed too long, too delicate. It had no face in the human sense, just a smooth, featureless mask of wood with two large, luminous silver eyes that blinked open and fixed on him. They held no malice, only a profound and ancient bewilderment. A klaxon blared through his helmet's external speakers, a piercing, ugly sound that shattered the sudden quiet of the library. On his HUD, the anomaly signature exploded from a simple gamma classification to an omega-level threat. Systemic reaction. Containment Protocol Omega initiated. All reclaimers evacuate sector. Orbital strike imminent. The Council did not take chances. He had not just broken protocol. He had awakened a ghost, and now they were going to burn the whole graveyard to put it back to sleep. The creature before him flinched at the sound of the alarm, its silver eyes wide with something that looked like fear. It took a hesitant step back, its leafy appendages trembling. Kale looked from the creature to the crumbling archway, his mind racing. He had two choices: run, and hope he could get clear of the orbital strike zone, leaving this being to be vaporized. Or something else. Something stupid. He made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. He slung the incinerator back over his shoulder and grabbed the creature's arm. The texture was smooth and warm, like sun-baked wood. It recoiled at his touch, but he held firm. "Come on," he said, his voice a harsh rasp through his helmet's external speaker. "We have to move." Now it did not understand the words, but it understood the urgency in his pull. Together, they ran from the library, out into the gray wasteland, with the sound of approaching dropships screaming in the sky above. The hunt had begun. They fled through the skeletal canyons of the dead city. The sky, once a uniform sheet of gray, was now scarred by the plasma trails of council vultures descending from orbit. The creature ran with a silent, impossible grace, its movements fluid and natural, while Kale's armored suit hammered against the broken ground, each step a testament to humanity's clumsy intrusion into this world. He did not know why he was doing this. An instinct he thought had been burned out of him years ago had taken over, a primal rejection of a command to destroy something that was, against all odds, beautiful. Distrust was a palpable thing between them. It followed his lead, but it kept its distance, its silver eyes constantly scanning him, then the sky, then the ruins around them. He was a monster to it, clad in the sterile metal of the world's destroyers. And it was a monster to him, an unknown variable, a bioweapon that could turn on him at any moment. Yet their survival was now intertwined, a fragile thread in a storm of fire and steel. A plasma bolt detonated 100 meters to their left, showering them with superheated debris. Kale shoved the creature behind the wreck of an ancient transport vehicle, the impact of the blast wave rattling his teeth. He risked a glance over the rusted hull. 2 vulture gunships were sweeping the street, their searchlights cutting cones of white through the gloom, their cannons chattering as they strafed anything that might offer cover. On the ground, a squad of council enforcers in black carapace armor advanced, their pulse rifles held at the ready. Leading them was a man whose armor was marked with the crimson slash of a lieutenant. Jorik. Kale recognized the swagger, the cruel efficiency of his movements. They had served in the same pacification campaigns on Cygnus X-1. Jorik was a zealot, a man who believed in the Council's mandate with a terrifying purity. He would not stop. He would never stop. Target is a reclaimer, designation Kilo 7. Jorik's amplified voice boomed down the street, distorted and metallic. Unit has gone rogue, aiding and abetting an Omega-level bioform. Commander's orders are to capture the asset, terminate the reclaimer. Capture the asset. So they did not want it dead, not yet. They wanted to study it, to weaponize it. A cold dread settled in Kale's stomach, colder than any fear for his own life. He checked his rifle's charge. 70%. Not enough. Never enough. The sylvan creature pressed itself against the metal behind him, its body vibrating with a low hum. It was terrified. He could feel its fear as a tangible pressure in the air. He looked at it, at the smooth, featureless face and the impossibly bright eyes. He had done this. He had brought this down on it. Jorik's squad was closing, using a flanking maneuver he recognized. They were professionals. He was outmanned and outgunned. He laid down a burst of suppressive fire, the blue bolts of his rifle splashing harmlessly against the enforcers' shields. They barely flinched. One of them raised a heavy weapon, its multi-barreled muzzle spinning up with a high-pitched whine. A shredder cannon. It would tear through his cover in seconds. This was the end of the line. A pointless, stupid act of defiance, and this was the price. He braced for the impact, for the tearing of metal and flesh. But the shredder cannon never fired. Instead, a sound like the cracking of ancient ice echoed from behind him. He turned. The sylvan creature had its hands pressed against the rusted hull of the transport. From its palms, thick, thorny vines erupted, growing with astonishing speed. They were not green, but a dark, metallic gray, the color of the city's dust. They wrapped around the vehicle, reinforcing it, then shot out across the pavement, burrowing into the ferrocrete. The ground shook. In the space of 5 seconds, a barricade of hardened, interlocking thorns rose from the street, 10 feet high and impossibly dense. The enforcers' first volley of fire sparked against its surface, doing nothing. The sylvan had saved them. It slumped back against the new wall, the light in its eyes dimming, a fine tremor running through its limbs. The effort had cost it dearly. Cale stared at the wall of thorns, then back at the exhausted creature. The first act of mutual protection. He had shielded it from the blast. It had shielded him from annihilation. The dynamic between them had shifted. They were no longer just a man and a monster fleeing a common enemy. They were allies. He placed a hand on its shoulder, a gesture he hoped would convey reassurance. The creature did not pull away this time. It looked at him, and its silver eyes seemed to hold a flicker of something new. Not trust, not yet, but an acknowledgement. A beginning. He had to get them out of the city, out into the great poison deserts where the Council's censors were less effective. Their journey had just begun, a desperate pilgrimage through a dying world. The next days bled into a gray smear of endurance. They moved by night, hiding by day in the hollowed-out shells of buildings or the labyrinthine tunnels of the old transit systems. The city gave way to shattered suburbs, then to the rust-colored plains of the outlands. The air grew thinner, sharper, tasting of chemical blight and industrial decay. Here, nothing grew. The ground was a hard pan of cracked, sterile earth, littered with the skeletal remains of a war fought with poisons and plagues. The sylvan, which he had begun to think of simply as her, grew weaker in this dead land. The vibrant green of her leafy hair faded to a dull olive, and the silver light in her eyes seemed to recede, like a tide going out. She moved slowly, her graceful gait replaced by a weary shuffle. She needed soil, water, light, things this world no longer offered freely. Cale shared his water ration without hesitation now, and he would crush nutrient-paced bars into the dust at her feet, a crude offering that she seemed to draw a sliver of strength from. He learned to read her needs through the subtle shifts in her luminescence, the droop of her limbs, the pace of her breathing, which was a soft, whispery sound like wind through leaves. Communication was a silent language of gesture and intuition. He would point the way, she would nod. She would touch a crumbling wall, and he would understand she needed to rest. In the shared ordeal of the wasteland, a quiet companionship took root in the barren soil of their mutual desperation. One night, they took shelter from an acid rainstorm in the belly of a fallen Leviathan, a council troop carrier that had been shot down decades ago. Its metal hull was pitted and scarred, a monument to the futility of the old war. Inside, the air was still and close. Cale worked on cleaning his rifle, the methodical clicks of the components the only sound besides the corrosive hiss of the rain outside. She sat opposite him, her back against the curved wall. She was observing the intricate process of him field stripping the weapon, her head tilted with a curiosity that was almost childlike. He finished his work and began to reassemble the rifle. As he did, He pulled up the sleeve of his jumpsuit to wipe grease from his forearm. The movement exposed the burn scars that marbled his skin from his wrist to his elbow, a puckered, ugly tapestry left by an enemy plasma grenade during his soldiering days. She leaned forward, her silver eyes fixed on the marks. Before he could react, she reached out a slender, bark-skinned hand and gently traced the path of the worst scar with her fingertip. Her touch was not human. It was cool and smooth, yet a strange warmth bloomed where she made contact. It was not a physical heat, but a feeling, an impression. He felt a phantom echo of the pain, the searing heat of the explosion, the terror of the battlefield. And then, he felt it recede, soothed by an overwhelming sense of empathy. It was as if she was not just seeing the scar, but understanding the memory of its creation. A single, luminous tear, like a drop of mercury, rolled from one of her silver eyes and fell onto his arm. Where it landed, the ancient scar tissue seemed to soften, the angry red fading to a pale white. The pain, the deep, phantom ache that had been his companion for years, vanished. He stared at his arm, then at her, stunned into silence. In that moment of shared vulnerability, a connection deeper than words was forged. She had seen his wound, and in return, she showed him hers. She pressed her palm against his forehead. The world dissolved. He was no longer in the wreck of a troop carrier. He was standing in a forest of impossible scale. Trees like living cathedrals soared into a sky of brilliant blue, their leaves singing a chorus of light and color. The air hummed with life, a symphony of flora and fauna so vibrant it was overwhelming. This was Earth as it was meant to be. He saw her people, the Sylvan, moving through the forest. They were not warriors. They were gardeners, caretakers, their forms woven into the very fabric of the world's biosphere. They communed with the trees, sang to the rivers, and guided the planet's growth with a gentle, loving hand. They were one with the world, and the world was one with them. Then the vision soured. A new color appeared in the sky, the gunmetal gray of ships. He saw the first council surveyors land. Their sterile metal forms a blasphemy in the verdant paradise. He felt the Sylvans' confusion, their cautious welcome. They offered gifts of fruit and knowledge. The council responded with scanners and drills. They saw the heartwood, the condensed life energy at the core of the Sylvan elders, and saw not a sacred life force, but a fuel source of unparalleled efficiency. The memory became a torrent of fire and pain. He saw the first tree fall, heard its silent scream echo through the planet's consciousness. He saw the council's enforcers march, their weapons turning the forest to ash. He witnessed the slaughter, the methodical, industrial harvesting of a sentient race for profit. The Sylvan fought back, not with weapons, but with the raw power of the world itself. They raised thorns and jungles, unleashed spores and plagues, trying to drive the invaders out. But the council's war machine was relentless. It answered life with poison, growth with fire. The war had not been a conquest. It had been an extermination. The council had not come to claim a hostile world. They had come to a paradise and turned it into a wasteland, then rewritten history to paint themselves as saviors. The truth hit Kale with the force of a physical blow. His entire life, his service, the scars on his arm, it was all built on a foundation of lies. He had been a tool for the very monsters who had murdered this world. The vision faded. He was back in the derelict ship, the hiss of the acid rain his only reality. He was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his brow. The Sylvan creature had lowered her hand. Her silver eyes were filled with an ancient, bottomless sorrow. She had shown him everything. Her history, her pain, the hidden truth of his own existence. He looked down at his rifle, the symbol of his allegiance to the council. It felt alien in his hands now, a relic of a life that was no longer his. He had been a reclaimer, tasked with erasing the past. Now he had a new purpose. He would fight for the future. He met her gaze, and for the first time, he saw her not as a creature or an asset, but as a person, the last survivor of a genocide. And he, one of the executioner's sons, would be her shield. Their flight became a pilgrimage. With the truth burning in his mind, Kale was no longer just running. He was searching. She guided him, not with maps or words, but with an instinct that pulled them toward the planet's heartlands. They left the blasted deserts behind, entering regions where the Council's poisons had not taken full root. Here, pockets of mutated, struggling life persisted. Twisted, gray-barked trees clung to cliff sides, and sluggish, armored creatures burrowed in the contaminated soil. The change in the environment brought a change in her. With access to living earth, however tainted, she began to recover. Her color returned, her movements regained their fluid grace. She could draw sustenance from the land itself, and in doing so, she began to heal it. Where she rested for the night, a small circle of pale green grass would be growing by morning, a tiny, defiant oasis in the desolation. These small miracles were a testament to her power, a power the Council saw only as a weapon. They did not go unnoticed. Commander Valerius was not a man to tolerate failure or loose ends. The hunt intensified. Vulture patrols became a constant threat, their searchlights sweeping the canyons and valleys. Kale learned to read their patterns, to use the terrain to mask their heat signatures, to think like the hunted animal he had now become. But it was a matter of time. The confrontation came in a place known as the Ashen Valley, a vast, open expanse of petrified forest. The trees were stone, their branches frozen in silent screams, casualties of a chemical weapon that had calcified all organic matter in an instant. It offered no cover. It was a trap. They appeared over the ridges on all sides. Not just vultures, but heavy assault carriers and ground tanks. And at the forefront of the ground assault was Jorik, his crimson-marked armor a stark slash of color against the gray landscape. He stood in the open hatch of a command crawler, a look of triumphant fury on his face. Nowhere left to run. Kilo 7, his voice echoed across the valley. Surrender the specimen. The commander might even be merciful. Kale knew Valerius's mercy. It was swift and absolute. He raised his rifle, but he knew it was a futile gesture. A dozen pulse cannons swiveled to target them. Tanks powered up their main guns. The sheer scale of the force arrayed against them was overwhelming. This was not a capture mission. This was an eradication. Valerius wanted to make a statement. Beside him, she did not cower. She stood tall, her silver eyes blazing with a cold, defiant light. She placed her hands on the petrified ground, and the air began to hum. The stone trees, dead for a century, began to vibrate. Cracks appeared in their stone bark, and from within, a faint green light began to shine. She was trying to wake them up, trying to call upon a memory of life long since extinguished. Jorik laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You see? It is a plague. It defiles the very dead. Fire. Purge this filth. The world erupted in fire and noise. Kale returned fire, his shots absorbed by energy shields as he dragged her behind the trunk of the largest stone tree. Plasma bolts slammed into their cover, chipping away huge chunks of petrified wood. The ground shook as the tanks opened fire, their shells exploding with devastating force. It was an unwinnable war. They were two people against an army. Her power was that of life, of creation. It was slow, patient, and profound. The Council's power was that of death, and death was always faster. Through the din, Kale saw Jorik leap from his crawler, igniting a thermal lance. He began to advance on their position, his face a mask of zealous hatred. He wanted to finish this personally. It became terrifyingly clear that even if they survived this battle, they could not win. The Council had orbital platforms, fleets of ships, armies on a dozen worlds. Valerius would never stop until Earth was a sterile, compliant asset. He would glass the entire planet from orbit if he had to, erasing her, the truth, and any hope of a future. The stakes were not their lives. It was the life of the world itself. As Jorik's advance forced them back, she grabbed Kale's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She pulled him deeper into the petrified forest, toward a vast, dark cave mouth that had been hidden by the stone trees. As they ran, she once again pressed her palm to his forehead. Another vision, but this one was different. It was not a memory, but a schematic, a solution. He saw the planet's core, not as rock and magma, but as a nexus of dormant life force, a great, sleeping heart. It was the source of all sylvan life, a place she called the wellspring. She showed him how her own life force could be used as a key to awaken the wellspring and send a pulse of pure life across the entire planet. A wave of creation so powerful it would instantly neutralize the Council's toxins, cleanse the poisoned soil, and reboot the entire biosphere. It would end the war in a single, silent, nonviolent instant. But the vision showed him the cost. The energy required was too vast for one Sylvan to control alone. It needed an anchor, a bridge, a consciousness that could straddle two worlds, the organic, networked mind of the Sylvan and the singular, individual mind of a human. The process would consume the anchor, dissolving their body and mind into the planetary network. They would not die, not in the traditional sense. They would become one with the world, a silent, sleepless guardian, an eternal farmer tending to a planetary garden. The impossible choice was laid bare. Victory could not be won with a gun. It could only be achieved through the ultimate sacrifice. His sacrifice. The vision ended. They were at the entrance to the cave. The roar of battle was behind them. She looked at him, her silver eyes holding the weight of the terrible knowledge she had shared. She was not asking him. She was merely presenting the truth, the only path forward. He looked back at the battle, at the fire and the senseless destruction. He saw Jorik, a man so convinced of his righteousness that he would murder a world to prove it. He thought of his own life, a hollow existence in service to the lies that had created this hell. What was he preserving by staying alive? His cynicism? His solitude? His pain? He had nothing to lose but the chains that had bound him since birth. He had spent his life taking ground, taking lives, taking orders. This was a chance to give everything. The internal conflict was not a storm, but a quiet, final settling of accounts. It was the cold calculus of a soldier weighing the cost of a mission, one life to save a world. The equation was simple. The answer was brutal. He looked at her, the last of her kind, who had shown him a truth worth dying for. He owed her this. He owed the world this. He slowly unstrapped his pulse rifle and let it fall to the dusty ground. The clang of the metal on the rock was a sound of finality. He then reached up and unsealed his helmet, pulling it off. The air of the Ashen Valley was thin and acrid, but it was real. He took a deep breath, the first he had truly taken on this world in a decade. He met her silver gaze. He did not need words. He gave a single, slow nod. Her expression did not change. Her face was a mask of wood. But he saw the light in her eyes flicker, and a single, silver tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of joy, but of profound sorrow and infinite respect. She understood. She accepted his decision. She reached out and took his hand, her cool fingers lacing with his. Together, they turned and walked into the darkness of the cave, leaving the war behind them to embrace their shared, terrible purpose. The cave was a passage, descending deep into the planet's crust. The air grew warmer, humid, and the walls around them began to change. The dead gray rock gave way to living stone, shot through with veins of the same phosphorescent material he had seen in the seed pod. A soft, emerald light pulsed from the walls, illuminating their path. It felt like they were walking down the throat of some immense, sleeping creature. Behind them, the sounds of the battle faded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very rock around them. It was the sound of the planet's heart, faint but growing stronger with every step they took. This was the path to the wellspring. It was also the path to Valerius. Kale knew, with a soldier's certainty, that the commander would have established his central command post at the source of the planet's energy. The final confrontation would not be in the valley above, but in the heart of the world below. As they emerged into a colossal cavern, his prediction was confirmed. The cavern was a breathtaking sight, a natural cathedral of glowing crystal formations that soared for thousands of feet. In the center of the cavern was a pool of liquid light, a swirling vortex of pure life energy. The wellspring, but the natural beauty was desecrated by the council's presence. A prefabricated command center had been erected on a platform over the pool, its stark, gray metal a cancer on the living rock. Cables and power conduits snaked from the platform, plunging into the wellspring itself, drawing its energy like parasites. Commander Valerius stood on the platform, his back to them, observing the energy readings on a holographic display. He was a tall man, immaculate in his stark white officer's uniform, a stark contrast to the grime and chaos of the world he sought to control. And guarding the ramp that led to the platform was Jorik, his thermal lance humming in his hands, his armor scorched and dented from the battle above. He had been waiting for them. I knew you would come here. Jorik's voice was low, filled with a predator's satisfaction. The creature always returns to its nest. Valerius turned slowly. His face was sharp, aristocratic, with cold, intelligent eyes that held no emotion at all. He looked past Kale, his gaze fixed on her. The last Sylvan, he said, his voice calm, almost academic. A remarkable specimen. Its energy output is beyond our projections. A pity it must be terminated. But its source of power, this will fuel our fleets for a millennium. He saw the planet not as a living thing, but as a battery to be drained. This was the final stand. There was no army here, just two men who embodied the conflict. Jorik, the fanatic soldier, and Valerius, the cold, corporate tyrant. Stay with him, Kale said to her, his voice quiet. I will buy you the time. She nodded, her silver eyes never leaving the wellspring. Her part in this was not to fight, but to prepare the ritual. Kale walked forward, toward the ramp, toward Jorik. He had no weapon, only his fists and the weight of his conviction. This ends now, Jorik, he said. Jorik laughed. It ended for you the moment you betrayed your oath. Traitor, he charged, his thermal lance swinging in a deadly arc. The fight was brutal and short. Kale was unarmored, but he was faster, fueled by a purpose Jorik could not comprehend. He dodged the searing blade of the lance, the heat of it scorching his jumpsuit. He moved inside Jorik's reach, slamming his fist into the joints of the man's armor. He was a soldier fighting a war. Kale was a man fighting for the soul of a world. But Jorik was armored, armed, and driven by a fanatic's rage. A steel-shod boot caught Kale in the ribs, sending him stumbling back. The thermal lance swung again, and this time he was not fast enough. The blade cut a deep, searing gash across his chest. The pain was immense, a white-hot fire that stole his breath. He fell to his knees. Jorik stood over him, his lance poised for the final blow. For the council, he snarled. But as he raised the weapon, a network of green vines erupted from the ground at his feet. They were not the thorny, aggressive vines from the city, but soft and strong, wrapping around his legs, his arms, his torso, holding him fast. He struggled, but the plants held him like living steel. She had intervened. Kale pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the fire in his chest. He staggered past the immobilized Jorik, up the ramp to the command platform. Valerius watched him approach, a flicker of annoyance the only crack in his composure. A pointless gesture, the commander said, drawing a sleek plasma pistol from his hip. Kale did not stop. He was bleeding heavily, leaving a dark trail on the metal floor. He knew he was dying, but his death was not the end. It was the beginning. He lunged, not at Valerius, but at the main control console for the energy siphon. He smashed his body against it, his momentum carrying them both over the edge of the platform. They fell. For a moment, there was only the rush of air. Then they hit the surface of the wellspring. It was not a liquid. It was pure energy, pure life. There was no impact, only immersion. The pain from his wound vanished, replaced by an ecstatic, terrifying sensation of dissolution. He felt his body coming apart, atom by atom. His memories, his consciousness, everything that was Kale, began to flow out of him, merging with the infinite ocean of life that was the planet. He saw Valerius for a moment beside him, his face a mask of horror as his body was similarly unmade, his sterile consciousness rejected and annihilated by the pure force of the wellspring. As his own identity faded, his last coherent thought was of her. He felt her presence at the edge of the pool, her mind reaching out, guiding his dissipating consciousness, weaving it into the network, stabilizing the connection. He was the bridge. The sacrifice was made. A wave of emerald light erupted from the wellspring, from the very heart of the planet. It shot up through the cavern, through the miles of rock, and burst from the surface, spreading across the globe faster than thought. From orbit, the Council fleet saw the dead, brown sphere of Earth bloom. The gray clouds evaporated, revealing an azure sky. The rust-red deserts turned to loam and sprouted with forests. The toxic oceans cleared, turning a deep, vibrant blue. The change was absolute, instantaneous. On the ground, in the Ashen Valley, the Council's war machine simply stopped. Their tanks were overgrown with thick, powerful vines that disarmed them without crushing them. The enforcers' rifles turned to wood in their hands and sprouted leaves. The vulture gunships fell gently from the sky, cushioned by enormous, blossoming flowers that grew to catch them. The war did not end in a blaze of glory or a final, bloody battle. It ended with a whisper of life. Jorik, still bound, could only watch in horrified awe as the world he had tried to purge was reborn in a tidal wave of green. The fight was over. 10 years passed. The world that was once called Earth breathed again. It was a garden, a place of impossible beauty where humanity had learned to live not on the world, but with it. The great, sterile cities of the Council were gone, their ruins swallowed by verdant forests and fields of glowing flora. New settlements were built in their place, symbiotic structures of living wood and shaped stone, nestled in the valleys and along the banks of crystalline rivers. The remnants of the Council's invasion force had been given a choice: integrate or leave. Many had stayed, their armor and weapons laid aside, their children born into a world without poison or war. The Council itself, its authority shattered by the inexplicable event and the loss of its primary fuel source, had fractured and withdrawn to the core systems, its lies exposed to the galaxy. A delegation from a newly formed alliance of worlds had come to Earth, seeking to understand, to learn. They were led by a young woman, a historian, her eyes wide with wonder at the vibrant life around her. She was brought before the acknowledged leader of this new Earth, a being they called the Sylvan Queen. She met them in a grove where a single, colossal tree stood, its canopy so vast it created its own sky, its bark shimmering with faint, silvery veins. She looked much as she had a decade before, a timeless being of wood and leaf, but her silver eyes now held a deep, serene wisdom. She was no longer the last of her kind. With the reawakening of the wellspring, thousands of Sylvan had been reborn from dormant seeds across the planet. "We do not understand," the historian said, her voice filled with humility. "Our science cannot explain this. Your world provides food that needs no cultivation, energy that requires no fuel, even your starships. We are told they are grown, not built." The Sylvan Queen looked up at the great tree, a sad, fond light in her eyes. "The old council saw this world as a resource to be plundered," she said, her voice like the rustling of leaves, yet in it, there was a faint, ghostly echo of a man's weary rasp. They sneered at the idea of a partnership with a planet. They saw only what they could take. She reached out and placed a hand on the immense trunk of the tree. The bark felt warm, alive, and a slow, steady pulse, like a deep and sleeping heart, could be felt beneath its surface. The council sneered at Earth's farmer. She continued, her gaze distant, lost in a memory that was now the planet's own. They did not understand his harvest. He produced grain from the soil he had become, fuel from the solar winds captured by these very leaves, and a navy from the hardened wood seeds that grow into our living ships. All from one harvest. The historian looked from the Sylvan Queen to the tree, a slow, profound understanding dawning on her face. "The farmer," she whispered. "Who was he?" The queen did not answer directly. She simply smiled, a gentle, melancholic expression. "He is the quiet root of all things, the guardian in the garden." A soft breeze stirred the high branches of the great tree, and its leaves whispered a name that only the wind and the world now remembered. Kale. His sacrifice was not an end, but a transformation. He had not died. He had become the harvest, his legacy written in every leaf, every branch, every new life on the world he had saved. He was at peace, his long war finally over, his vigil eternal.